Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And if you're new to this, what we do is I'll go through what's happening in the world of solar PV this week. And then we'll also highlight some of the activities, some of the webinars, conferences that are coming up. And then we'll go into a bit of a deep dive on a topic that's related to solar. This week, what we're going to be talking about is basically what do all of those panel specifications mean? That when you get a solar panel, you get a couple of sheets of panel specs. So I just thought, let's do a little bit of kind of some of its review, some of its basics, some of it is stuff that was new to me as I started researching it. So always interesting to see what you're looking at. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in for the news from the week of November 10th. The U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, has forecast that electricity coming from hydropower plants in 2024 will be about 13% less than is the norm. They use a 10-year floating average on that. In fact, it's the least amount of hydropower that has been generated here in the U.S. since 2001. There are extreme and exceptional drought conditions that have been affecting different parts of the United States, particularly the Pacific Northwest, which hosts the majority of the U.S. hydropower capacity. By the end of September, 72.6% of the continental United States was experiencing drier than normal to exceptional drought conditions. And by the end of October, that had increased to about 87%. Currently, the U.S. gets about 5.7% of its electricity from hydropower. The recent report by Renewable Energy World magazine, what they did is they analyzed all of the different projects surrounding battery manufacturing capacity, whether it's expansion of existing plants or new plants that have been announced as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. And they're just wanting to see, are these plants in fact being built? Is this expansion in fact taking place? What they found is the vast majority of them are indeed going forward with enough capacity to create batteries that will be put into as many as 5 million electric vehicles. The amount that is under construction represents about 72% of all of the production capacity that had been announced, and about 79% of all of the new jobs that were announced. These projects represent a capital investment of around $52 billion. They will support about 490 gigawatt hours of production capacity each year and will employ as many as 30,000 new jobs within this new growing battery industry, primarily located in the southeastern US, the Midwest, and the southwestern United States. There's also been an extraordinary increase in the amount of battery storage systems installed. Much of this is utility scale stuff. It really is transforming the national grid. Altogether, the United States in the last 4 years has installed 20 gigawatts of battery capacity storage on the grid. And more impressively, about a quarter of that has been installed so far this year in 2024. Now, to put this capacity in perspective, essentially that 20 gigawatts of storage represents about 20 nuclear reactors had those been created over the last 4 years. So this is not an insignificant thing that's happening here on the grid. The growth shows no signs of slowing down. The EIA projects that if everything goes according to the announcements, that this 20 gigawatts will actually double to 40 gigawatts by the end of 2025. So really, the grid is transforming into having storage capacity. Yeah, Pete, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, what is the gigawatt hours of that capacity? What you're talking about is the rate of discharge. What's the capacity in terms of gigawatt hours?
Yeah, I think let me see there was the 490 that's manufacturing capacity. No, I don't
Oh,
know. I don't know. So
it,
the
as the manufacturing capacity, they probably mean gigawatt hours.
Yeah, that's 490 gigawatt hours of annual capacity that is being that's new capacity that's being added to the production. But I don't know how much capacity in gigawatt hours. I guess that depends on how often they charge and discharge the 20 gigawatts of of capacity. So I guess we'd measure it differently when you talk about installed base as opposed to production of batteries. All right, Solar Cycle announced this week details of the solar panel recycling facility that it's building down adjacent to its glass manufacturing facility in Cedartown, Georgia. This 255,000 square foot facility will have the ability to recycle up to 10 million solar panels each year. Although at the beginning, they're planning on only ramping up to about 2 million panels a year as far as capacity is concerned. But the anticipation is that over the years, as the end of life process of solar panels, we'll start to see more and more demand for recycling. The facility is expected to employ more than 1,250 people at both the glass manufacturing facility and the recycling facility when it reaches full capacity. The recycling process that they're using will recycle up to 99% of all of the material that comes from these panels. This material will then be reprocessed. Most of its silicon will be processed into glass at the adjacent glass manufacturing, and then that will in turn be sold to American domestic solar panel production companies. The Cedartown facility joins Solar Cycle's other recycling facilities, which are located in Texas and Arizona. And the recycling plant should be open mid 2025. The glass production will come online sometime in 2026. And the Biden administration clearly made the transition from the fossil fuel industry or the fossil fuel economy to the renewable energy economy a top priority of the administration. With such high-profile things such as the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and a whole bunch of other activities that have incentivized the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Well, President-elect Donald Trump has clearly signaled a change of course. In fact, in May, he said he would issue an executive order to end offshore wind, on day one. They always like the on day one thing. And then also said that he would turn back a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act incentives. However, even before the election took place, several weeks or even a couple of months ago, 18 House Republicans had submitted a letter to House Speaker Mike Johnson urging him not to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act incentives should the Republicans take control of the House. They're maintaining that the vast majority of these incentives are going to Republican congressional districts, and they've seen a real benefit, a tangible benefit in jobs and investment within their districts. In fact, a nonpartisan business organization called E2 did a study on this, and they found that from the incentives that are borne out through the IRA, about 60% of the federal money is going to Republican districts, and about 85% of all of the private investment that is associated with these are going to these red districts. Contrary, or I guess the signal here is in the early hours after the election, at least the stock market feels like this incoming administration may not be all that great for renewable energy. A number of high-profile companies were punished pretty significantly. In fact, Sonova Energy, the solar installation company, its stock price on last Wednesday fell over 50%. And that's the news from the solar industry for this week. So, does anybody have any comments? Anything that you want to throw in there? Anything that crossed your desk before we move on to the next section? Give it just a second. All right, seeing none. I will jump into some of the announcements here. All right, on November 12th, we're going to see a webinar here on how operations and sales forces can work together better. That's at 1 p.m. On the 13th, which is in tomorrow, I guess, services let's see, I'm having trouble reading my thing here. Services for for permitting processes that are available, some programs that are available. This is 1 p.m. Then we see how gas companies can incorporate hydrogen to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That might be interested. Those of you who follow this a lot, I'm not all that keen on hydrogen. I think it's the technology of the future and always will be, but we shall see. November 18th at noon, linking owners, brokers, and insurance, how all of these various factors within the industry can work together better. The 19th, maximizing DER, distributed energy resources, is what that is, to maximize the value there, 2 p.m. And then there's Generac. Let's see, the battery storage systems. I think this is focused on Generac, yeah. November 20th at 2 p.m. Then pile design for utility scale. I know a lot of you aren't involved in these great, huge projects, but I'll be interested to see just what's new there. And then March 24th and through 27th, this is a few months off into the future, but some of you may be interested in when the upcoming NABCEP conference is. That's going to be in Reno, Nevada. So I guess they're gambling on the future of solar. And then, of course, our online courses are available at solarpvtraining.com. They're in-person and online courses. And I've been plugging our new Understanding Photovoltaics textbook, the 9th edition, which is out. I need to take that hopefully off. It's there, it's in print, it's tangible. So that's the upcoming events. Give you another second before I jump in. Our topic for today is essentially, what do the panel specifications mean when you're getting these sheets? So before I jump in here, anybody have a comment or something you want to add or a question that has occurred to you? I think one of the nice things about this format is it is interactive, so we can get some real-time feedback on what's going on.
Two comments.
Sure.
So, years ago, there were all these criticisms of PVs of what's the payback and what's the energy payback. And, it's quite good. But there has been one missing element of that, and that if you make a closed cycle, you start doing the recycling of the products, that will be, how does that factor into the overall net energy and the payback, which I think overall could be positive, jury's out. But it's just something, sort of a heads up maybe to keep an eye on as these recycling businesses come online, because that fills in a blank in the life cycle analysis that we just haven't been able to really look at. So comment there.
Yep, good point. A lot of times we only focus on the economic aspects of something, and then you say, okay, well, what are the externalized costs of this particular industry? I think as a solar industry, we want to minimize those as much as possible, and this is one of those things that does minimize it. So far, solar recycling has not been a huge issue, but it's still an issue because when you're installing these panels, there's damage in production, there's damage in transportation. So there is a certain amount that needs to be recycled, and
Right.
that's good. I also think we're going to start to see, as we transition from silicon to perovskites or perhaps some new technology, that some of the other externalized costs, such as mining or materials or
Yes.
even the electricity, the heat that's necessary to melt the silicon, all of those things begin to diminish. And so hopefully our industry just sort of gets better and better and
Oh,
better.
I absolutely believe that. And then one comment on the hydrogen, I completely agree with you on hydrogen in general, with one exception that you might note is the geologic hydrogen. There's a big push on geologic, and that one makes sense, but that's a niche.
Yeah, yeah. And there may be some other niche markets for hydrogen, because, of course, the hydrogen itself one of the problems with battery technology, which hydrogen is always used to sort of say, okay, we can offset the need. It's a storage of energy, essentially. Problem is, it's difficult to store, uses a lot of energy to store. It's difficult to move from one place to another. So, but the energy density of a battery is not necessarily a good application for certain things like airplanes, for example. So there may be a development of a hydrogen fuel for airplanes, or the one thing I keep thinking of is if you think about offshore wind turbines, and they're maybe, they generate power, but as long as if there's no need for that power, then you curtail it. Well, you could use that curtailed energy to generate hydrogen, so the cost of fuel would be next to nothing, and then have a stationary electrolysis plant because you've got unlimited water. You could convert the water into oxygen and hydrogen, and then perhaps use that for fueling boats. It's already offshore. You just pull up. You don't have transportation. I don't know. So we'll see, but I suspect it'll be a very niche marketplace as it evolves. So it's certainly not the be all and the end all. I have the same feeling about nuclear, by the way. That's a thing where people are chasing grant money. All right. So, all right, let's jump into the solar specifications. When I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking, okay, most people, at least if you're involved in solar, you're aware when you look at these specifications, you know how to select one panel versus another. But there's a lot of information there in the spec sheet that you may not exactly know what it means, why it's there, what it does. So I just thought we'd take a bit of a deep dive into it. And I just feel like this might be a good tutorial. Siggy, for your class, this might be good. Since you're online, they can learn as we move forward. So when you go to buy or select a solar panel, you're going to get a spec sheet. And the spec sheets typically are going to look something like this, something like that illustration there. So let's jump in and analyze each bit of it. There's, of course, the marketing material is going to tell you who's producing it, where they're being produced, what is the wattage of the panel. Typically, these spec sheets have multiple panels that, at different watts. So there might be a 280, or not anymore, but a 380, a 415, a 405, and a 425. And they're all there, and they're going to have different numbers. So that's the number there on the left. That's its rated production or its maximum power point when you're looking at an IV curve. In this example, it's a 405 watt panel. Now, what is its power tolerance? Well, typically that power tolerance is going to be how much does each panel or panels within this particular brand deviate from that stated power. And we oftentimes will see that as plus or minus 5 watts, 5%, whatever it may be, 10%. In this particular example, they're saying it has a positive power tolerance, which basically says you might exceed 405 watts by as much as 5 watts. It may go to 410, but it will never go below 405. So that's what they're meaning by a positive power tolerance. They're basically saying, all right, basically this panel under standard test conditions is going to produce between 405 and 410, but not less. And then, of course, they'll always talk about the efficiency. This particular one is saying 21.1% efficiency. I think folks oftentimes will focus on the efficiency of a solar panel. It means very little, actually, unless you have limited space, because really you're worried about how much is that thing going to produce, not how efficiently it produces it, unless you're manufacturing things. But if you have a limited space, well, maybe you want to go to a very high efficiency panel because it will take up less of a footprint. But for the most part, most of us, we're not all that worried about the efficiency. We're just worried about how much the thing's going to produce. And as I go through these, if something occurs to folks, just jump on in, all right? Then we get into warranties. That's often on the spec sheet. With this particular unit, it's telling us that it has a 25% performance warranty. Now, the performance warranty is essentially, sorry, I said 25%, it's 25-year. It's saying that how much is it going to degrade over time and still be considered under warranty. So what this panel is telling us is that, yeah, it's warranted for 25 years, but we expect a certain amount of loss of power over that time. They're saying that in the very first year, you should expect to have a 2% loss. That happens because of LID or PID, light-induced degradation, or potential induced degradation. Typically in the first couple of weeks or even a month, that's when most of the loss happens. So first year, you're going to lose about 2%, just to anticipate that. And then from that point forward, they're basically saying 0.55 or about 0.5% per year. So at the end of the 25 years, that panel should be producing at least 84.8% of that rated 405 watts. If it's not, it's fallen outside of the warranty. If it is, still functioning just as they projected. Then we do mention PID. I mentioned PID there. In fact, on this warranty sheet, they even talk a little bit here. Ensured PID resistance through cell processes and modular. So they were very proud of that here. Well, what is PID? PID is essentially a way that the panel degrades, and it's caused by a difference in potential between the solar cells and the ground. Now, many of us who work in residential solar, this is it's kind of a non-issue because it really is for high voltage panels. Really, these are for 1,000 watts or greater for the most part. It could happen, but PID can cause losses up to 40%. You may find it and can develop in very shortly after the thing's been installed. So you would install the system, it seems to be working, and then there's a problem. Well, it may be in potential induced degradation. And that's something that you just, they deal with it in the structure of the cell. So that's why they're advertising it. I believe, and I might be talking out of school on this, it has, no, I don't even want to mention it. I'll say it wrong. So something to look for anyway. All right. So certifications. This is very important on the spec sheet, and they're always going to list off their certifications. This particular panel, the comprehensive certifications they list, I think there's a few of them there that they just threw in that I don't care overly about when I'm selecting a panel. The ISO 9001 quality management systems. If you're familiar with the ISO standards, a lot of these are, there's quite a process you go through as a corporation to get these, but it's not a big deal to us when we're selecting the panel. It's more how they're running their company. Are they meeting these goals and objectives, that kind of thing? The ones we're concerned about in this particular thing is the IEC 61215, the IEC 61730, IEC 61701, and the IEC 62716. Now, I'll go into these in a little bit of depth here, just to let you know. The 61215, this is a standard that is essentially talking about how well does it stand up to outdoor use. Well, so solar panels are going to be outdoor. So this is something that you would look for in the solar panel manufacturing. I would assume most quality manufacturers are going to have met the 61215. It talks about mechanical load, how well it withstands the various mechanical issues and climate issues as these panels are exposed to the elements. Now, this is the one that typically we look for first, at least I do. This is 61730. Now, this is the newest, it's a relatively new standard for the American market. What they've done is they've harmonized the UL 1703, the ANSI UL 1703, which we've looked at for many, many years about quality manufacturing. They've harmonized that internationally, and now you typically see it as 61730. It is required as part of the National Electrical Code now that these panels meet this. It specifies all the things you would want a panel to be constructed to avoid, such as electrical shock, fire, personal injury, things like that. So, in a lot of our classes over the years, I've always said, if it's not 1703, don't buy it. Well, now it doesn't roll off the lips as easily, but if it's not 61730, don't buy it. So this is the new standard, the primary standard we're looking at. Then the 61701 is for heavy salt environments. It's just saying that this particular panel has been tested and is resistant against salt. If you're located near the ocean, that would be a big deal. Also, and a lot of people don't think about this, in a wintry environment, if you're located near the road and you get a lot of kick up from all of the salting on the road, mist, salt mist, brine mist, things like that. So you might want to consider making sure whatever panel you're selecting, if it's located in that environment, does meet the 61701. And then another one that comes into play a lot in agrivoltaics, because we're starting to see this on farms a lot. And I do a lot of evaluations in rural areas, farms particularly. For example, just did a couple for dairy farms. And ammonia, big deal. It's something that if these things are not resistant to ammonia, in a farm environment like that, they're going to degrade very, very quickly. So the 62716 is an indication that this particular panel has been designed and tested to be higher resistance to ammonia. And ammonia is not just in like the urine of animals. It's also used in fertilizer sprays, things like that. So be aware of that. Okay. Give it just a pause here in case somebody throws their hand up. Okay, so then we get into cells, and oftentimes the spec sheet is going to talk about the number of cells. And the number of cells vary, and the variation is getting more and more dramatic. For the longest time, most solar panels that we were using were 60 cell. They were just 6 cells across, 10 cells deep. Typically 3 strings of 20 in there with 3 bypass diodes built into that unit. And then we also started to see 72 cell systems. So those were bigger. Someone had a question in the chat, is the ammonia resistance just the panel, or is it the connectors, the wires and all of that? I would assume it's all. I mean, the whole module is being rated for that. All right, so it was that the cells themselves for many, many years were uniform in size. So you could almost say, okay, a 60 cell panel is going to be this size, a 72 cell panel is going to be this size. I think there's 96 cell panels, much bigger. But the cell sizes are changing. There's now a whole variety of sizes. We start getting into half-cut cells. That's coming up here. So oftentimes now it's not going to be a 60 cell panel. It's going to be a 120 cell half-cut. Yeah, Pete, you had a question?
Yeah, those standardized cells were a benefit from the old silicon fabricating industry when the whole industry was based on 200 millimeter diameter cylinders of silicon. And then when the industry moved on, the 200 millimeters all got used up eventually. And now the industry is using much bigger ones. So we're kind of on our own as far as cell sizes.
Yeah, it's not something you can just say all cells are this anymore. It's kind of I'm sure it'll be all the way to manufacturer specific as time progresses. So I just want to point out that there are different cell configurations, and it's just letting you know what they are. And where that comes into play in our design is not every inverter is compatible, especially if you're talking about microinverters. So you might want to double check that the panel that you've selected is compatible with the microinverter or the inverter system that you're selecting as well, because they're not always going to be compatible. Then, as I mentioned, we have half-cut cells, and they're also oftentimes called split cells. These cells, they are really exactly what they're saying. You take the cell, you cut it in half, and then they put them in strings. Instead of 3 strings of 20, for example, here, now they might have 6 strings of 20, but they're half cells. There's some advantages of this. Some of it is that their shading is reduced. So if one string is shaded, it's only going to affect 1/6 of the panel rather than 1/3 of it. Also, because the amperage is less, you're going to get some better performance out of that. Smaller wires. There's a little less voltage drop. There is voltage drop even within the panel. So the distances are lessened to about 50% of what they are because the junction box is no longer connected at one end of the panel or the other. Typically with a half cut, it's in the middle. It's in the middle of the panel. So all your wiring is going half the distance. So they're eking out a little bit of efficiency by doing that. And then, of course, there's bifacial panels, and just stuck this picture up. These are panels that have solar cells on top, solar cells on the bottom. Typically, they're for ground-mounted systems, but they could be for some ballasted roof systems with white roof. They basically catch the albedo, the reflected light, and harvest it from underneath the panel as well as above. These things got to be more and more popular in recent years because when Trump initiated the tariffs on Chinese panels, they neglected bifacial panels. So you could buy bifacial panels and avoid the 30% or 25% tariff coming in from China. The Biden administration sort of fixed that, but it still sticks. I think people found that the bifacial, it adds a little bit of cost, but it also adds a bit more production. So in those situations where that is where the panels are not just directly against the roof, offset by 4 inches or so, bifacial may be the way to go. So again, that will be noted in the spec sheet when you're looking at it, which is the whole purpose of this discussion, what you're looking at, what you should look for. Then you get into some mechanical specs. And these mechanical specs are exactly what you would imagine. They're telling you, okay, well, what are the mechanical characteristics of this particular panel? This illustration here is showing you in millimeters what the physical dimension is of those panels. It's also showing you that the junction box is going to be centrally located. Those little installing holes there can be helpful. Some racking systems, you simply bolt them in place, but I often use those little holes to just kind of figure where the rail should be. Because if that's where they're designed to be supported in a bolted system, I figure if it's not bolted through the panel itself, but you use top-down clamps, that's probably a pretty good spot for the rail. Gives you a little bit of guidance. You don't have to stick to that exactly. Then it'll tell you what kind of cell it is, monocrystalline, polycrystalline. Is it a thin film? Is it a tandem cell that's got perovskite on it? You can see here it's 120 cells. So that's telling me it's probably, well, it definitely is half cut. I could see that just from the drawing there. These are half cut cells coming in there. And it's monocrystalline, it's 120 cells. It's got the module dimensions. It's got the weight. Now, normally the weight is going to be somewhat just under 50 pounds. The reason for this is OSHA requires anything over 50 pounds requires 2 people to lift and move. So they're trying to keep it under 50 pounds. They don't always do that because realistically, you're working with these panels. They're pretty big. I don't see it being logical to only have one person, because it's just too easy to slip, too easy to drop. To having 2 people with the size of these panels just makes sense. And especially if you get a gust of wind or whatever, you can, go parasailing off the roof. So you definitely want a couple of people handling that. It's then telling us what kind of glass is on there, the encapsulated material. I looked up what that is, the EVA or the POE, and there was all sorts of information about one's better than the other, but it didn't really matter to me. If you're making solar panels, maybe that's a thing, but for me, it didn't matter. The back sheet, white. All right. most of them are white, unless it's a bifacial. Then, of course, there's no backsheet. You've got solar panels, on both sides. The frame, what's it made out of? Most of them are anodized aluminum. And the J-box rating, now this is something I had not known or understood before or even overly cared about, but basically the IP68 rating means that you can basically put that puppy underwater and it's not gonna leak into that J-box. There are other ratings. I know there's an IP67, which is a little bit less robust than the 68. So if that's your thing, if it's in a very wet environment, maybe that's an important distinction. The cables, I wasn't all that worried about it. I tried to look at that, didn't quite understand what they meant there as far as the lengths and the like. The only thing that occurred to me is if I'm trying to connect from one to the other, is that going to be an issue? And then, of course, there was the MC type connector. Now, bear in mind the connectors that we're used to dealing with, MC4 connectors. MC4 is like Kleenex. It's like Xerox. It's a brand, but it's been used generically. And they're not all MC4s. In fact, this particular module uses what they call a TS4 connector. And it's a big deal to make sure these connectors are all intermatable. In fact, the new panel connector standards require that if you're making jumpers, which you will in a solar installation, it has to be the same brand and same type of connector as is on the panel. Both the UL 6703 and the IEC 62548, they require that. It's not, don't assume these things will work with each other because they don't often. And it's one of the leading causes of fires in solar arrays is putting mismatched connectors on your array, because the mateability there may be just off enough to cause some arcing, to cause some hot spots. So you want to make sure if you're using, in this case, a TS4, then the jumpers that you're going to create are going to be TS4s. Now, in a lot of the utility scale systems, they'll often, and in some of these bigger panels, when you get a shipment, some of the panels are going to come with extra connectors sort of taped to the back of the panel. And that's nice, because if you're making a jumper out there in the field, it's nice to have the exact connector that you're going to need rather than having to run out and procure it. I've also seen them where they have the actual MC4 tool taped to the back of the panel as well. So that's very, very helpful. And this little table just kind of shows some of the variations, how these things are and the like, but just gives you a little bit of insight that different types of connectors they behave differently. So, and then we get into some of the IV curve issue. And when we're talking in class, this is sort of where we focus a lot of our attention, because you're getting some electrical characteristic ratings such as ISC, IMP, the Pmax or the MPP, the Imax, and the ISC. So these are designations just to refresh your memory what those things mean. If we look at that IV curve on the right, this one is talking about a 395 watt panel. Well, the 5 designations, you'll get these things over here on the left. You'll see the maximum power voltage, or in this case, they call it a VMPP. Unfortunately, nobody is standardizing on the terminology or the abbreviation for this. You'll see in this case, VMPP. That's the voltage that the panel will be generating when it's operating at its rated voltage. We'll see that as VMP. We'll see it as Vmax. Those are all the same thing. That is represented there right in the middle and the bottom there. The Pmax is its rated wattage. So as it's operating the panel under standard test conditions, that's what this thing is showing at 1,000 watts per square meter. Then there's a electronic device in the first electronic thing that connects to the panel. It could be the inverter, it could be a charge controller, could be an optimizer, but it has what they call an MPPT, the maximum power point tracking device, and it's going to keep this panel operating at the maximum power point, regardless as the environment changes. And the environmental changes we're dealing with are primarily temperature and irradiance. This diagram shows irradiance changes. So if the irradiance, sorry about that. If the irradiance goes down, then that maximum power point is going to change as well. So that's it moves all over the place. Now, the other two numbers that you're looking at is VOC. That's the theoretical maximum voltage that a solar panel could produce at standard test conditions. We use that primarily as a design criteria because the NEC says for residential systems, you cannot exceed 600 volts in your system. So we're going to use VOC because that's the theoretical maximum voltage. When we're trying to figure out what it's actually doing, we're going to use VMP. Then the ISC, the same thing. ISC is used in design because that's the theoretical maximum amperage that panel could be operating under. And so when we're designing our wiring system, we're going to use that number because we want to err on the extreme side, on the high side. Under either of those conditions, ISC or VOC, you can see that the volts or the amps is going to be 0. Well, anything times 0 is 0. So you do not want to operate under those conditions because the panel is going to produce 0 watts. So we're going to be operating at the Pmax with an ampacity of the IMP, the amps, the maximum power current, and we're going to be operating at a voltage, maximum power voltage, and the maximum power current times the maximum power voltage should give us our maximum power point in watts, because amps times volts equals watts. All right, so we're seeing that over here in this diagram or in this table on the left. Those numbers change a little bit, based on the panel itself. You don't have to calculate those numbers. Those are going to be given to you, but you will need those numbers when you're doing your design calculations. You're going to need those numbers when you're figuring out voltage drop. So those numbers are very important. They'll be given to you, but you just need to understand those. Okay, then we get into STC versus NOCT. And that is, NOCT is designed to be a little bit more real world than STC, standard test conditions, versus nominal operating cell temperatures. It's a terrible acronym, but that's sort of more realistic numbers. STC assumes conditions where 1,000 watts per square meter irradiance, temperature of 25 degrees Celsius, and atmosphere 1.5. It's kind of what you would see on a clear day at sea level if the temperature is around 77 degrees Fahrenheit or 25 degrees Celsius. NOCT has different conditions. It will assume it's 800 watts per square meter irradiance, because that's more normal. We don't always have clear days. Ambient temperature of 20 degrees Celsius. Now, bear in mind, there's a difference there between ambient temperature, like the air temperature, and cell temperature. The cell temperature is going to be significantly hotter, just because, like, if you touch something black that's been out in the sun. I think typically they assume somewhere around 45 degrees Celsius is the typical cell temperature when they're talking about these. And it also has wind speeds of 1 meter per second. So we look at these numbers. Oops, and I don't want to get off of that. These numbers are going to be a little bit less. So if we're comparing this chart, I think the 400 and, well, let's just look at the left-hand this panel is showing 295 watts. So essentially what it's saying is when it's operating, that's about what you should expect on a normal day. Problem with this is there is no such thing as normal. Every panel is going to be installed differently. There may be shading issues. It may be at a different angle. It may be at a different azimuth. So these things are assuming ideal conditions, but those conditions may not be ideal. But even so, NOCT is showing you 295, and this one here is showing 390. So for the same panel under standard test conditions, going to be 390 watts. And then they're saying, but realistically, you should be talking more like 295. One other, I haven't gotten into temperature coefficients. I want to raise that when I get there, getting ahead of myself. All right. So any questions to this point? I just want to give you an opportunity to throw out any questions if I've gone too quick on it. Those of you who have been through the class, a lot of this is review, hopefully. So. All right. Temperature ratings. Well, the temperature ratings here, if we jump on in, you'll see that the nominal operating cell temperatures, in this case, they're saying it's going to be 43 degrees, plus or minus 2 degrees Celsius. Now, where this comes into effect is most solar panels are going to assume 45 degrees Celsius. That's kind of the industry standard. So if you're getting a panel that's saying something less, that means this panel is designed in a way that it's going to be slightly cooler than most of the panels that are out there on the market, which means it's going to produce slightly more power. So the lower the temperature that comes up under the NOCT temperature rating, the better. Then we've got temperature coefficient at Pmax. Well, I'll get to that in a second. I want to jump just below that to temperature coefficient at VOC. When we're figuring out string calculations for a standard string inverter, when we try and figure out how much the inverter can handle, normally string inverters have a voltage range. So let's say the voltage range of a string inverter is from 100 volts to start it up to 550 volts as its maximum. For residential, it's not going to be more than 600 because that's the limitation. Well, normally you would just say, okay, well, what's the most amount of volts that this panel could produce? So we take VOC, we divide it into the maximum for the inverter, and we get a number. So let's just say it's 60 volts and VOC is 30 volts. Well, that makes life easy. So a 600 volt inverter, 30 volt VOC, that means I could hook up 20 panels in a string and not exceed the 600 volts, except for the fact that temperature affects the amount of voltage a panel can produce. So that that voltage is set at 25 degrees Celsius. If it gets colder, then it will produce more voltage. If it gets warmer, it's going to produce less. Well, we don't care about the less voltage. We're worried about the more voltage. So how much less? Well, it's just saying temperature coefficient VOC, it's going to produce 0.25% more voltage for every degree Celsius below 25 degrees. So if it were 0 degrees Celsius, which is freezing, then we take 25 times 0.25. And I don't know if I can do that in my math, but in my head, it's going to be, 6%, something like that. Anyway, but we don't do that. We say, what is the coldest temperature ever experienced at that site? We take the difference between that and 2020 and 25 degrees Celsius, which is the temperature coefficient at standard test conditions. And we end up with a number. Let's say it's 15% more. So now we take the VOC times 115%. So that's what we use that number for in our string calculations. Well, the Pmax is going to tell us about actual production, the temperature coefficient at Pmax, because that number is slightly different because it factors in not only the effective temperature on voltage, but it factors in the effective temperature on amperage as well. So what we would use there is we would take that and we would say, all right, well, how much is this panel actually going to produce? We could calculate because all of our numbers are based on STC. And I could say, all right, if the operating temperature is typically 43, and I know for every degree Celsius difference, this panel is going to produce 0.34% less voltage or less power. I could take that 0.34% times the difference between 43 and 25, which in this case is 18. And I'd multiply those together and I would find out what would be my expected loss of power output because of temperature, just normally. And I could do that for varying panels, and I could end up with, a comparison there that might be important as I'm selecting the panel. So that we're digging down deep into the woods there, or into the weeds, into the woods. But I just wanted, that's kind of the purpose of this, is to really get you understanding what these things are telling us and why we would care. The warranty information there, 12-year product warranty, that's typically physical of the panel. Is the lamination going to peel off? Is the aluminum thing going to break apart? Is this thing physically going to hold together? You've got a 12-year product warranty there. The power warranty is 25 years. So we already saw that in that diagram that says, okay, by the end of that, it's going to be 80 something percent. That's that. And it is telling you straight up here, the first year, you're going to lose about 2% of your power. From that point forward, you're going to lose a little over half a percent each year. And you may want to factor that into your production estimates, especially if you're talking to a customer. Just level set with them, say, all right, we probably want to put that 2% right into our D rate factor right off the bat, because even though it says it's going to produce that much, it's really going to produce 2% less within that first year. The rest of it, I would just level set with them. I wouldn't want to try and calculate that into my production estimates, at least at the outset. Then you get into some maximum ratings. The temperature ratings, minus 40 to 85 degrees, that's quite a range. Voltage, this one will go up to 1500 volts DC, even though with residential here in the US, we're limited to 600, but Europe is limited to 1500. So most of these panels are going to be 1500 volts because they want to sell them all over the world. And then this comes in surprisingly an issue when you're ordering. How many panels come in a box? 36. How many boxes, how many panels in a tractor trailer, 40-foot container? And so if you're doing a really big project, you might want to order in those kind of increments. That's why a lot of these larger installers end up having orphaned panels, because they may get better deals when they're buying. So if let's say you're putting in a 70 panel system, then you might order 2 boxes because you get a box price, a better price. Well, that's going to leave you with 12 panels left over. So now you could either use those on another project, but if you only have 5 or 6, it's maybe not enough for another project. So as a homeowner or as a small installer, you may work with some of these larger guys and say, hey, as you accumulate some of these orphaned panels, will you give me a good deal on them? Because I'd like to take them off your hands, because I'm doing little 4-panel installations or 6-panel or 10-panel, something like that. I think that's it. I think I covered everything on the spec sheet. We got a couple of minutes here. Does anybody have any questions on panel specifications that I didn't touch on or I was confusing? Yep, Pete, I see your hand.
Yeah, regarding the tie-down locations on the panels, specified in from the end a little funny to share with the group, and that is that a local installer here who charged money for a system, installed the mounting rails horizontal, and then mounted the panels horizontal on them rails, tying down on the ends of the panels. And sensing that that was a long span, it made my eyebrows rise right up. They then drilled holes and installed feet on the sides of the panels to carry the load, the snow load for here in Wisconsin.
I
Sounded Yeah, it sounded really amateurish to me, but they're known in this area, and you just don't know what you're buying when you buy in with a professional installer.
Yeah, and sometimes, you may have a firm that's reputable and they just hired some Yahoo who just doesn't know what they're doing. When people ask me, where should I put the rail? A good rule of thumb that I use anyway is you figure if you've got this, like let's say this thing is the panel, um, you're wanting to have the rails go across the short side. It sounded
Yep.
like you were saying they mounted them like that
Yeah, the
and
ladder.
then attached at the top and the bottom. Is that what they were doing?
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
seriously.
weird. Yeah, I usually say, okay, come in about 25%,
Mhm.
leave 50% between the two rails, and then you'll have another 25%. That's, close enough. But if you've got those little holes, that's kind of their support location based on the manufacturer. So if you line them up with those holes, it makes life a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think that's what they had in mind, and we just clamp them from the front, but I think the locations are still what they had in mind.
Yeah, and some railing systems do actually have you bolt the panel to the rail. So not very common from my experience, but they still exist. So it's a good guide. Another thing that you'll want to make sure when you're putting the rails down is get everything squared up. Make sure that you level the rails because especially if you're putting them on a roof, sometimes that roof is going to be a little bit sway backed. It's not necessarily flush and level the whole way. So put the rails on loosely and then take a rail and raise those rails up. I lay the rail across the whole span vertically and then just move the rails up until they touch the bottom of that rail so that everything's leveled out, you know, doesn't necessarily follow perpendicular to the roof, but the top of it is one single plane. In case you're getting some dipping and some diving in your roof itself, sometimes it's not obvious. And then the other issue is making sure everything's squared up because you put the first panel on there, that's going to be sort of your cornerstone, and then everything's going to key off that. So you want to make sure that everything lines up and the rails aren't sort of going off south so that you start up with them in the right spot, but by the time you get to the end of the row, the top rail is 50% down the panel. So a lot of little things like that when you're sticking the panels up there.
Hey,
Yeah, Siggy.
Jay, yeah, what I keep preaching here at in class is read the installation manual, read the original equipment manufacturer installation manual when it comes to clamping down. Manufacturers give you a clamping range, and you're correct. I mean, it's going to be close to that mounting hole, but some manufacturers have kind of like elaborate calculations or ranges. They give you pressure ratings for if you are mounting on the edge or if you're mounting within clamping range or out of clamping range. If you mount landscape or portrait, it has a significant effect on the pressure ratings that they warrant, and which is a real problem down here in Florida. I have permits and installs all the time where they place them because they can squeeze them in on the roof. They make them landscape. They mount on the short edge of the module, and the wind rating is just not there. So those people are out of luck. They got to take that thing off again and find another solution, or turn the rails north-south, which is kind of difficult to do to stay on the rafters.
Yeah.
So yeah, here in Florida, in hurricane wind zones, it's a real issue. There are some areas that are coastal where certain modules, like in particular the large ones, 144 cell modules or larger, they just won't have the rating. They just won't meet the pressure rating that we'll have in these coastal zones. So you simply can't install the big module. Just take it off, get another one, get a 60 cell module.
Yeah. And that is an issue. I know in the ratings, we didn't really go over that, but what the pressure ratings you're talking about is because there's so much wind loading or even snow loading in some locations, they're saying that the module will not crack. It will, because these things flex, when they get pushed down, pulled up. And so you want to make sure that the rating will survive whatever whatever the environment is locally there. So you're just saying some of them just can't handle the wind.
Actually, on all of our drawings, I by default I have a instruction on there says mounting only on the long edge of the module, and then within clamping zone. So
Oh,
if
okay.
someone wants to mount on the short edge of the module, that's a special review.
Okay, so you're saying you would go ahead and mount like this here in order to avoid the flex of the ends with the wind? Is that what you're
So
saying?
we only allow placing the hold down clamps on the along the long edge of the module.
Oh,
within
okay.
the
Yeah,
mount,
yeah.
not on the short
Perpendicular.
edge.
Perpendicular to the long end.
Yes.
Right. Okay, good. All right,
Only
because that
mounting
was
on
going
the
to be
long
new.
edge.
That would be new information to me if you were going sort
Well,
of this way.
I took that from some manufacturer's instructions from a manual, and I said, "Oh, that sounds good. I'll gonna stick with that from now on." So anyone who wants to put a clamp on the, let's say, landscape, because landscape and portrait is relative. If you turn the rails up north south, then the short edge will be actually it'll actually be, you know, on the long edge again if you turn them in
Yeah.
landscape orientation. So landscape and portrait is relative. So that's why I use the language only mounting on the long edge. If you want to mount on the short edge, then we'll have a special review.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I don't think I know. Pete was mentioning seeing them mounted on the shorter end, so basically the rails going perpendicular to the short edge. I've never seen that, but
They do it all the time, but it's terrible. It's the module just doesn't have the
yeah,
structural resistance.
yep. Well, clearly they didn't design it that way. And then the other thing that occurred to me when you were talking is torque specifications. So when you're doing that, you need to make sure you follow those torque specifications and your instructions. Well, we'll tell you that. Unfortunately, we don't like to read instructions, so that's all right. Well, I think we've come to the end. Thanks for everybody's input, and we'll call it a day. And I'll see you guys all next Tuesday. All right.
Right.
Take care. Bye bye.